And the way I got this motorcycle was one day when I had my bike shop, somebody called me up and said, I'm bringing an old bike. You take bikes on trade? Well, yeah, sure, bring it up. And I was on a Saturday morning, I was sitting there standing in the showroom looking out the window, and I see a pickup truck come in, and all I could see was this bike from here up.
Wow.
And I'm going, that looks like me. We made some kind of diligent trade, and that's what I've done my whole life, is trade up, collect old bikes.
Yeah.
And I try to keep a lot of the good ones.
Dale was a one-man hurricane. When he set his mind to doing something, it got done.
Sometimes you feel like you get exhausted just being around him because he just never stops.
Follow me, I'll show you what we're gonna do today.
The average person might think this is just some piece of junk. What I see is a lot of opportunities.
A treasure hunter is always after the next treasure.
He was at the forefront of a lot of, kind of thought processes in the old bike world. He's one of the first guys to be really, really, really into originality, untampered with motorcycles, machines that had survived from barn finds to beautiful original paint, well-preserved stuff.
Walking swap meets with Dale. It was part social, part educational, and part just crazy. The people who would come up to him and talk to him at swap meets, people he'd known forever, all the stories you'd hear. But he was always the first one out there looking. And that speaks volumes about his personality. He was determined.
Dale Walksler worked all of his waking hours, again, fueled by his passion to get the job done, but we would come in, we would run the museum for 8 hours, we'd go out and have a dinner.
And then he would go, you hear that? It's a 36 knucklehead engine calling me. And out the door he'd go, and he'd be in the shop till midnight.
The first 7 years, I believe, that the museum was open, the museum ran 364 days a year.
And a lot of times, he was the only person in that museum. I mean, if anybody came in, he did everything. It was, he worked from dawn to dusk. He was there before I got there at 6:30, and he was there late at night working on motorcycles, probably most of the night.
His dedication to this project and this museum was 24 hours a day. And it was not uncommon for him to call me any time of the night and say, I just want to run an idea by you.
Well, last night was a late night in the back shop working on the 1924, 1925 FH Hill Climber, and today's a whole new day. Running this museum is really no different than running this motorcycle. You have to know what you're doing, but you really have to have the passion for it.
I think many who would be, watching this, seeing this, could appreciate Dale's gift for having a dream about something, even something audacious, and then actualizing it, by putting in the work.
For a guy that was always motivated towards forward progress, I think, his vision was kind of ever evolving as he would set a goal, a lofty one, and he would get there, oftentimes sooner than he thought he would, and then readjust and recalibrate and raise the bar a little more, and then shoot in that direction. His vision was a continual refinement with an overall goal of affecting and connecting with people, and he did that through motorcycles.
So many people walk through the door and they wonder how one person, even in 52 years, could put together a collection of this size. And it was because of that passion that Dale had.
I've spent over 40 years tracking down rare machines, memorabilia, and artifacts, but the real find here at Wheels Through Time is the history behind the machines.
It's staggering to think that he began by buying a Survey car in his youth, starting a small motorcycle shop, then getting the backing of his dad, buying this Harley-Davidson dealership and being the youngest Harley-Davidson dealer ever, and then building it into this, again, world-class organization that serviced all kinds of folks from near and wide.
He recognized that beyond the dealership enterprise and what could be done with a dealership, there was a much broader, market for Dale's prowess in other American motorcycles and other American-made products, and his collection was already pretty amazing by then. He had a Wheels Through Time in Southern Illinois that was modest by comparison, but he was well on his way to, being a museum operator, curator when he was transitioning.
The growth of the museum from Mount Vernon to Maggie Valley is unparalleled. Mount Vernon, there was quite a few cars. Actually, Dale was a car collector, and he also liked old motorcycles, and it was a very worthy collection down in Mount Vernon, but it's nothing like it is at Wheels Through Time Museum today. It is phenomenal. I don't know, there's maybe bigger museums in the country, but there's none like Wheels Through Time Museum that has the bikes sitting out where you can walk around them, sit on them, hear them run. It's the museum that runs.
He kind of redefined what a museum is. Historically, museums are pretty quiet places, kind of dull, not a lot of excitement and energy happening inside the museum, and his vision for Wheels Through Time was very different.
I mean, the Smithsonian collection is magnificent, but it doesn't run.
Pat and Chris knew that at Wheels Through Time, everything runs. There was no better place to see their machine come back to life. It's exactly what we do. Take old pieces of history and make them run. It's kind of a simple thing. Just kick it. Making a digital presentation is nothing new for me. Over 10 years ago, I started with the Time Machine, and that parlayed into our hit television show, What's in the Barn on Velocity. By the way, that show airs all over the world today. I'm Dale Walksler, and I dig deep into America's barns. There is layers of history in here. I'm a hunter and a gatherer, on the trail for unique and antique. Oh, that's it. Yesterday's junk is today's hidden treasure. How can the glass not be cracked? It's a 103-year-old windshield. Because sometimes you have to know what's in the barn. Woo!
Once he started What's in the Barn, all of a sudden the museum admissions were hundreds and hundreds of people, where before it was only maybe 10 or 20 a day. All of a sudden we had hundreds of people coming in.
And after that, he came back to us on the History Channel for season 7 of American Restoration. The great news about all that television exposure was the exposure that Dale was getting and the museum was getting was just staggering. And of course, Dale being Dale, he also augmented that with his, foray into the social media.
He was so ahead of the curve in so many different avenues. One of the things I look back on, he was doing his streaming videos in 2004, 2005. This is before YouTube was even a thing. He was creating hundreds of videos, creating a library, because he saw the future of television and the future of connecting with people done through the internet. And he put immense amounts of energy into that, and it still is paying off today. And his mission was really to keep Wheels Through Time in front of people. And he found a million ways to do it. There's things like the 24-hour runs and the coast-to-coast runs and the land speed record stuff that we all did with old bikes. He'd pour immense amount of thought and energy. Like the Fred Ham run, for example. We took a 1937 Harley-Davidson Knucklehead and rebroke, or attempted to rebreak, the 24-hour record that was set in 1937 on a really similar bike. It was done by a guy named Fred Ham. And immense amount of effort went into, restoring the bike, hundreds and hundreds of hours. you know, making the connection with Talladega, assembling the team to go down there and try and re-break this record, all with the mission and vision of keeping Wheels Through Time in front of people, and it proved incredibly successful.
So one day I get a phone call from Dale. He says, we're going to ride coast to coast. You in? I said, what are you talking about? He says, you in? I said, yeah, sure, I'm in. What are we talking about? He said, a group of us are going to get these old motorcycles. They have to be 1915 or older. And we're going to ride coast to coast. We all rode out on, most of us were on 1915 Harleys. And we rode from Kitty Hawk, North Carolina to Santa Monica, California. And he would live for stuff like this. And every day he'd be out riding, and every night he'd be in the parking lot wrenching, seldom on his own bike.
Dale was rescuing everybody. He was so kind and thoughtful and helping everybody and trying to work on his own bike, but everybody was in his trailer looking for parts and advice, and he was pretty patient.
That was Dale Walksler. Always willing to help anyone and everyone on their bikes, never expecting anything in return, and then moving on to the next one. He was a force of nature in the vintage motorcycle world.
One day he got one of the old bikes out, I don't remember which one it was. It had a sidecar on it, and Shiloh, his dog, was riding in the sidecar with him, and he pulled up out front. He told Shiloh, he said, get out. And he said, come on, Gerald, get in here. He didn't have a seat in it. He had a piece of foam in the bottom floor of that sidecar. And I got on that piece of foam in that sidecar on my knees, and he took me plumb to the top of the mountain behind this museum, throwing gravel and spinning and me hanging on in that sidecar on my knees. And thank God I was hanging on, because he did not let up. That was my first sidecar experience in my life, and the last one. So
we headed out of town, and we turned down this road, and there was a cornfield with a cable across the little farm road which said no trespassing. And Dale, without hesitation, just rode up to it and lifted the cable up and waved me underneath it. And so we ended up going trail riding. I was on a Hemi Crocker, and he was on this original paint Harley 45. And at one point, I'm dragging all these weeds behind me with the Crocker, and I said, Dale, what happens if I crash this thing and wreck it? He goes, well, fix it. And you know, that's just the way Dale was. You know, I mean, there was nothing that he had that he didn't want to use.
Actually, the bike I'm going to do this on is about a $250,000 motorcycle.
People look around the museum and assume that motorcycles are what mattered most to Dale, and what really mattered most was people. He had this ability to relate to people and connect with people that is rare in this world. And most folks that knew Dale, or folks that had known him for 30 years, or folks that walked into the museum first time, ended up leaving feeling like they'd been friends for a long time, and he just had that effect on people.
He loved to know their personal stories. He liked to find out where they were from and what they did. And more importantly than anything, he made them feel welcome at Wheels Through Time, and made everybody kind of unique in their experience of coming to this museum.
He was a generous man, and not because he wanted people to know he was generous, but because that's who he is.
And some people would come in and never been here before, and he'd go out and welcome them and bring them on in for free. You know, and that was a big deal to them. It's a really, really big deal. And he done that a whole lot. He done that a whole lot.
Dale had the heart of an underdog, and he was all about like sticking up for other underdogs. The thing about Dale is, even though he was like a little guy like I was, he was a pretty fearsome guy.
Dale would do things for people a lot of times without them even knowing. Numerous times we would go out to dinner, especially when we were traveling.
And Dale secretly calling the waitress aside on the way out and paying for their breakfast.
Every time I talked to him on the phone, he would say, is there anything that you need down here? You know, he was always a giving person. always willing to help, always a compassionate, understanding man.
And he looked at me and he goes, "You don't have a motorcycle lift?" And I said, "No, man, I just get on my knees and I build it right here on the floor." And he didn't say anything else. So about a week later, when he came back to pick the bike up, he pulls up in that little old minivan and he goes, "Come here, Gerald, help me." And I walk out in the parking lot, and here he's got a motorcycle lift he took out of the back of his shop, loaded it in that van, and brought me a lift.
Still got it.
It seems about impossible to describe my dad in one word or phrase, but if I had to pick one, it would be one of a kind.
Totally one of a kind, and just in any direction.
Visionary. Dynamic.
What a dynamic personality. So full of energy.
Rambunctious.
The ultimate enthusiasm.
Dedicated.
Relentless.
Passion. I don't think I've ever known anybody that had as much passion as he did.
Successful.
Confident.
Eccentric.
Extraordinary.
Amazing.
Sunny. I mean, he had a sunny disposition. He had an infectious enthusiasm about him.
Generous.
Romantic.
Dedicated.
Visionary dreamer.
A great man.
Knowledgeable, kind, thoughtful. There's just too many. I can't.
There is no one word that describes Dale Walksler. There couldn't possibly be one word to capture his beautiful, gigantic, outgoing, larger-than-life personality. There's just not one word.
When he first started collecting motorcycles, he had no idea what an impact he would have on the world.
I don't think that old motorcycles would be what they are today without Dale Walksler.
Harley Davidson owes Dale big time.
I always consider him, one of my two greatest mentors. And, people kind of, as you go through life, kind of guide and direct you, and, things happen. And when it came to antique motorcycles, we were on the same page, and we had great mutual respect and admiration for each other. And he taught me a ton. Across the board. And
he would dive into the history and the mechanics and the context out of which an individual machine emerged. He could not give that information away fast enough to our guests, and to me for that matter.
He wanted to share the story of the American motorcycle with every visitor that walked through the door. Not just to build a collection so people would think of how great he was, but he wanted the history of these bikes to be relatable to the guy who's been in the motorcycle world for his entire life, to the person who's never seen an antique motorcycle until they walk in the doors of the museum. The passion that he poured into this place is not just visible, but it's really, in a sense, palpable. You can feel it when you walk in the door.
And he was one of the smartest person that I've ever been around or ever met, which I've met a lot in the motorcycle business. And he knew he had more knowledge of the motorcycle than anybody that I've ever known. He was like an encyclopedia. And he knew what part went everywhere. And on top of being a genius, he was a good mechanic, a real good mechanic. So
I remember just watching him and just trying to stuff as much of Dale as I could in my brain. I always said, if you could just download a little bit of what you know into my brain, I would know so much about old motorcycles. And I think that's the thing about Dale.
He was a great connector. He would find objects and things and motorcycles, and when they were put together, they actually told the whole story. So he would find a racing motorcycle from one gentleman, and then, in his collecting, he would then somehow come across the helmet that he had, articles on this particular fella, his old, iron racing shoe. And so even though history had separated all these things, Dale was able to bring all these things back and put them together again.
Dale had a really great, uncanny knack of knowing. You could tell him, like, I needed a certain part, and 3, 4, 5 years later, he would remember it, and it would show up. I remember telling him once, like, I needed a quadrant bolt for the rear freewheel clutch on my 1914, and like 3 years later, here this original one shows up in a blister pack, and like out of nowhere, you know, he just remembered that, I know someone. And so that always was like the coolest thing, because you could tell him something you never knew, but you know, at some point it was gonna happen.
He's just an incredible, contagious enthusiasm and a personality that just drew people to him. You know, I don't think there'll ever be anybody else like him.
If Dale were here right now, I would say to Dale something that I told him many, many times, that yours is a life well lived.
All I can say is, well done.
Look at the foundation you've created.
A pretty incredible accomplishment, what you did here, and it affects people far beyond what I thought he ever dreamed that it would.
I know I wouldn't be the person I am today without this museum and the impact he personally had on me.
Thank you, Dale, for what you've done for me and what you've done for the motorcycle community worldwide.
Thank you.
Thank you. And
I love you.
Tell him how much I love him and how much I miss him.
How proud I am of you, and always will be, of the legacy that you built and what you left for the Walksler family to continue on with, and for generations of our visitors to come that are going to be able to see what you created.
Hey, buddy.
Let's get to work. Let's get that thing running.
Thanks for being my friend.
How much I appreciate allowing me to be a part of this whole museum.
Let's go get Dad and take him for a ride.
Yeah, I'd tell him to lay a black mark about 50 feet through the building. And make a lot of noise.
He was good at that.
He enjoyed that.
God, I love that motorcycle. Thank you, everybody. That's it for the show.